From ABC News, World News Sunday, here's Carol Simpson.
Good evening. Millions of Soviet voters went to the polls today to cast ballots in a landmark referendum. They were asked to decide whether the Soviet Union should be preserved as a federation with less power for the Kremlin and more for the individual republics. Hanging in the balance is not just the fate of the Soviet Union, but the future of Mikhail Gorbachev. The country is already so divided on the question that of the 15 republics, 6 are boycotting the referendum. 9 others did participate. We begin with ABC's Jim Laurie.
In the Soviet Far East, 7 hours ahead of Moscow, they have counted votes in Vladivostok, and early returns show Gorbachev is getting the yes vote he wants. He should. The military, the KGB, and the Communist Party machine have been working overtime. In the republics which have refused to carry out the poll, the military, using army trucks, organized voting. In Moldavia, troops guarded special polling stations for ethnic Russians, while Moldavians gathered outside, opposed the referendum, and tried to stop voting. In rural areas, home of many conservative older voters, a yes vote was favored. But in cities where Gorbachev is very unpopular, the vote was opposed. If Gorbachev's for it, said one voter, then I'll be against it. In Moscow, referendum politics revolved around Boris Yeltsin, Gorbachev's arch foe. Yeltsin forced a second item onto the ballot, asking whether people want a new president of Russia elected by popular vote, an election Yeltsin would most likely win.
The old centralized system must be destroyed and a new system built on democratic principles.
Gorbachev again defended the need to keep the Union together as it is and condemned those like Yeltsin who push for the greater independence of the republics.
It would be a tremendous tragedy for this country and the entire world if someone was insane enough to provoke the breakup of the Union.
Gorbachev has staked his credibility on the vote, and his supporters will try to use a majority yes vote to strengthen his weakened position. No matter what happens in today's referendum, Gorbachev will be left with the same problem as before. Rebellious republics unwilling to listen to the Kremlin. As one voter said, it was a nice exercise, but it solves nothing. Jim Laurie, ABC News, Moscow.
When they're finished counting the votes sometime tomorrow, it's expected Gorbachev's referendum will pass. Then he'll have to face the next question in dealing with the Baltics and other rebellious republics. To keep the Soviet Union together, does he employ a policy of negotiation or confrontation? Here's ABC's Rick Enderfurth.
This is not what President Gorbachev wants to see. In Lithuania last week, the first recruits for the Republic's national army were sworn in. Another step in the Baltic states' drive for independence from Moscow, a move Mikhail Gorbachev adamantly opposes.
He personally is very concerned about the precedent that if Baltics or even Lithuania secedes from the Soviet Union, it can trigger a chain reaction.
Gorbachev said today, as he has before, that he is willing to discuss independence, but only under the terms of the Soviet Constitution and its very stringent secession law.
It's absolutely impossible.
Why?
Oh, just read it. It is much worse than the most sophisticated computer game.
Other Baltic leaders expect that law will be revised to enable serious negotiations with republics to begin.
Now question is what kind of price those countries must pay for independence.
Gorbachev does have alternatives. A continuation of the status quo would see Soviet troops deployed throughout the country to deal with ethnic unrest, or the imposition of martial law. But
Gorbachev is a person who doesn't want to enter into history as a person who first gave birth to democracy in the Soviet Union and then destroyed it.
moreover, as the Dean of American Soviet Watchers, George Kennan, wrote recently, any effort to deny independence to rebellious republics would not only bring greater difficulties and advantages to the Kremlin, but in the long run would probably fail anyway. Rick Enderfurth, ABC News, Moscow.
Joining us briefly tonight from Boston is our regular expert on Soviet affairs, Dr. Robert Legvold, the director of the Harriman Institute at Columbia University. Bob, is it possible that Mr. Gorbachev will come out of this vote even weaker than he is now?
I think that's a distinct possibility. This is a very big moment in the Soviet Union. 300 years of Russian history are coming to a head. It is all focused on what's to become of the Soviet Union, whether it's going to disintegrate into a series of republics. Gorbachev would like to have a clarifying result. It's unlikely, unless he wins really big, that he will get that clarifying result, and that's unlikely in turn.
Now, does it, whatever the outcome of the vote, does it mean that the Soviet Union will be better able to solve the national crisis it's been facing?
That depends on the way in which Gorbachev responds to the result. If, in fact, he sees that this effort to dig in his heels and preserve the Union, if necessary by force, is ill-fated, that it's not going to work, and that he does have to begin negotiating some kind of transfer of power to the republic, some kind of new system within the Soviet Union, then indeed we could be at the threshold of first steps toward resolving the stalemate around the national question. But if Gorbachev decides that he doesn't have to respond in that way, then I'm afraid we sink deeper into paralysis within the Soviet Union.
Thank you very much, Dr. Robert Legvold, for that analysis. After his meeting with Soviet President Gorbachev last week, Secretary of State Baker conceded today that he was unable to make any headway on a START treaty, which would reduce troops and nuclear arms in Europe. The Secretary said the Soviets didn't even want to discuss it. Baker may, however, return to Moscow next month to try and work out conflicts. Coming up, Secretary Baker on the progress toward finding a Middle East peace. And later in this broadcast, adjustment problems for GIs returning from the Persian Gulf. And the children of Kuwait coping with the wounds of war.
World News Sunday, brought to you by Cotton Incorporated.
Secretary of State James Baker, fresh from his Middle East peace mission, today said the war against Iraq has bolstered U.S. influence across the region. He said enhanced U.S. credibility could help solve long-term intractable problems, such as the Arab-Israeli conflict. But as Jean Meserve reports, Mr. Baker would not say how.
Secretary of State James Baker returned to Washington this morning, having traveled more than 16,000 miles in 10 days to feel out the positions and mood of both Arabs and Israelis. Baker will next make specific peace proposals, but on This Week with David Brinkley, he refused to spell them out.
If I present them to you, that will require people to immediately respond, many times negatively.
The Secretary did make it clear, however, that no country will be asked to make unilateral concessions.
Nobody should have to go first, Sam. They ought to be willing to move together. And they ought to abandon these old rigid formulas and rigid stereotypes that have prevented peace for these many years.
One country Baker visited that may be willing to abandon an old position is the Soviet Union. Baker says the Soviets are seriously considering opening relations with Israel, which would make way for a Soviet role in any future peace process. But it is clearly the United States that is propelling things now, using the prestige and clout the Gulf War has given it in the region. Baker always cautions that the problems of the Middle East are deep and difficult, but he seems encouraged by what he believes he found on his trip, a new flexibility from all parties to the conflict. Jean Meserve, ABC News, the State Department.
President Bush ended his 5-day post-war planning trip today by greeting U.S. GIs returning to Fort Sumter in South Carolina. Mr. Bush praised the Persian Gulf veterans for helping this nation liberate itself from what he called old ghosts and doubts. After Operation Desert Storm, the president said, "No one doubts America's courage and resolve anymore." Joyful scenes like the ones today have become familiar ones in recent weeks as GIs come home to their families. However, ABC's Jed Duval reports that after the initial excitement and relief, there can be problems.
You fantasize about this reunion, this wonderful scene where he gets off the plane and runs across the runway and carries you off.
There's more here than the camera sees. Happy reunions can, within days, lead to tension, disappointment, anger.
And the 3-year-old who's been so excited about dad or mom coming home is kind of standoffish.
On their way home, mixed with the anticipation, some apprehension.
I've been so worked up about going home and thinking about, well, am I expecting too much when I go home?
This here got to be almost a part of me over here, and she said the same thing to me, that we almost getting used to not having you around.
Once made up overwhelmingly of single men, the now volunteer forces are more than 60% married people.
We're the Army's business because we know that families are an integral part of our readiness and an integral part of retention.
Transition from battlefield to home life.
This past week, the Army began using new materials, teaching the troops over there and the spouses at home about resuming family life.
You know, they're feeling exactly the same way that you all are feeling, believe it or not. A little bit different standpoint, but basically they're feeling the same way.
Women at home have learned to cope, to handle life on their own.
I'm pulling on strengths that I didn't even know that I had. I want my husband to come home. I'm anxious for him to come home, but I don't want to lose what I've gained.
Don't feel guilty that you have gained independence and you like it.
Meetings such as this one will go on as long as needed. Lessons in how to be together again after a war.
Ladies, they're not going to want to go out to dinner the first night they come home.
It used to be said that an army travels on its stomach. Now the generals are paying attention to the heart as well. Jed Duval, ABC News, Fort Belvoir, Virginia.
They're big in the comics, on TV, in movies, in live shows. And now a new survey says the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are bringing violence to the classroom. 95% of the teachers responding to the survey provided examples of aggressive behavior linked to the turtle characters. And the study says that although they are well-motivated crime fighters, kids emulate the karate chopping and pizza chomping, but little else. When we come back, helping the children of Kuwait recover from the war. If children are the future, then it's possible the future of Kuwait is in great jeopardy. Yes, the Iraqis have been pushed back out of Kuwait, and the damage to the country will eventually be repaired. But dealing with the damage inflicted on the children will take a great deal longer to fix. That is, if it can be fixed at all. ABC's Mike Lee found a man on the streets who's doing all that he can to help.
These Kuwaiti children look normal enough, yet they are wounded. Their minds are suffering the aftershock of war. The Iraqis took one of my family and beat him, said this girl. He has not come back home. Thousands of children here have seen friends and loved ones captured, tortured, or killed. Their emotions have been sabotaged. But unlike the damaged oil wells everyone talks about, their fires are burning out of sight. Jim Garbarino is an American child psychologist here on behalf of the United Nations Children's Fund to assess the damage and recommend ways to salvage a valuable resource.
Kids who really bury these images and have dreams but stop talking about them. Everybody says, well, it's over, let's all go back to normal, and no one gives them a chance to really wrestle with some of the painful things they've experienced.
Garbarino talks to them on their level, about their feelings, their war still going on.
Does she ever dream at night, dream about the Iraqis?
Yes, she says. Many dream of seeing people kidnapped or of being taken away themselves from their mothers and fathers.
More than half the children have had some direct experience that we would think of as being traumatic. Seeing someone killed, discovering a body, seeing a hanging body or a tortured body.
To treat the wounds, psychologist Garbarino first opens them up. He asks this girl to draw a picture of what she actually witnessed, a man being hanged to death by the Iraqis. She draws her real-life nightmare as if it were a school assignment with no outward emotion, but her hands have begun the subconscious process of healing. This boy was in a car with his father when his dad and several other men were kidnapped. He's not been seen since. For the first time, he's asked to tell his story with a picture. And what does he dream about? I dream that my father sits beside me now and tells me to take care of my mother. Despite the good intentions, there's little that one psychologist can do. The government is preoccupied with politics and reconstruction. There is no plan for mass educational therapy. Saving these children from their own worst nightmares is, for the moment, a low priority. Mike Lee, ABC News, Kuwait.
Thousands of cases of thyroid disease and cancer may have resulted from radiation the government admits to releasing 40 years ago. Watch ABC's World News Tonight this week.
Now let's go to Ray Gandolf in New York for a look at a new attempt to launch a new football league and today's sports highlights. Ray?
Thank you, Carol. North Carolina is one of college basketball's Sweet 16 for the 11th year in a row. The Tar Heels, seeded #1 in the East, brushed aside Villanova today. George Lynch led the way with 19 points. Ohio State, top seed in the Midwest region, escaped barely from Georgia Tech. Here's Trey Lee with an exclamation point. Eastern Michigan advances over Penn State in the East in overtime, and in the West, Utah beat Michigan State in double overtime. Well, will you be ready for professional football by Saturday? The entrepreneurs of the World League of American Football figure that you will, and the New York, New Jersey entry held an open house today to hustle some season tickets. Armin Katayan was there.
I can actually see what I'm looking at.
Welcome to the new World League of American Football. Designed to be user-friendly, fast-paced, a spring league of nations connected by touchdowns and television. The World League has teams in 7 North American cities, and for the first time ever has exported America's game to Europe, to Barcelona, Frankfurt, and London. There will be 10 regular season games, 2 weeks of playoffs, and even a World Bowl in June.
It is not just an American city pitted against an American city or Texas versus California, but you're talking about Germany, United Germany, coming to California and playing.
To add some international flavor, each team carries 4 foreign athletes. Not that learning to block and tackle has been easy.
This is high level, like more speed, and this is like bigger guys, and the guys have been playing longer.
The hardest thing in American football is the fact that you've got to remember all the plays and you've got to be able to react to all the plays.
We're trying to do things in a new, creative fashion, and I think the public is going to see some exciting, hard-hitting run-and-shoot football.
What the public will also see is what the league likes to call 21st century football. Things like the no-huddle offense, play calling by helmet radio, innovations geared towards 2 things, high scoring and television.
ABC Sports and the USA Network have invested a reported $50 million in the league over the next 2 years. That commitment, combined with the NFL's support for the league, convinced team owners to ante up the $11 million franchise fee. To control costs, the World League created a salary scale where players are paid according to position. Average salary, $20,000 plus incentives.
The contract obviously is incredibly one-way. It's archaic as far as the players are concerned.
Not that the players, who come in all shapes and skill levels, are complaining much.
One of the reasons I'm here is because I love the game of football, and it's a chance to put on a helmet and a pair of pads every day, and that's what I want to do.
The Spring League sees events like today's open house at Giant Stadium as a golden opportunity to sell itself to the local community. But so far, season ticket sales and name recognition have been weak for the WLAF.
WLAF's radio station? You know, it doesn't feel right because it's in the spring. When I think football, I think fall.
The thing that's most important to us is growth. We're in this for the long term.
But for the short term, a few more days like today certainly can't hurt. Armin Katayan, ABC News, East Rutherford, New Jersey.
The NFL watched gleefully as 2 previous efforts to establish spring football failed. It has embraced this league, all in the name of good, clean money. Carol?
Thanks, Ray. When we come back, polka music in Texas. Polka music in Texas? Finally, this evening, we called ABC's Charlie Murphy the other day in Texas and asked if he had any plans for the weekend. No, he said, but there is this big polka festival halfway between Austin and Dallas. A polka festival and Charlie Murphy on the weekend, we thought? Go right ahead.
That square box, the accordion, has become hip. What does that say about polka?
The accordion is coming back.
as a result of that, polka is coming back and sort of riding the coattails of the accordion.
It's the first Texas Polka Festival in Belton. 39 bands belting out polka. People jamming in the hall. Glitzy piano accordions. Old button boxes built during the last great polka craze.
My hometown is Cleveland, Ohio, where these were made, and this is like a
Cadillac.
Yeah, it's like a Cadillac.
Paul, the dealer, asked for a little plug. Texas has a large ethnic population. Where else do you get German sausage in a tortilla? Or a Mexican band playing German polka? Artists like Valerio Longoria have made accordion popular and given polka panache. You don't have to be ethnic to do it.
Anybody that can move their feet can get out here and dance.
They're doing the Texas polka step, also called the Czechoslovak step.
Right shuffle, left shuffle, right.
This is the Midwestern hop.
You see, instead of the shuffle, they're doing the hop. Actually, instead of shuffling the feet, they're picking their feet up.
It'll make an old man forget his crutches.
A lot of people we talked to said polka is making a comeback. You think this is making a comeback? Well, a lot of people here say it never went away.
And there's a whole new crop of accordionistas coming along. If you're down around Texas Czech country next spring, check it out. Charles Murphy, ABC News, Belton, Texas.
And that's our report for tonight. I'm Carol Simpson. Good night.
This has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.